up to the stage. An actor and a photographer. He lives in Venice. He works in TV, films, and he's currently at a really great theater, Pacific Repertory Theater, doing A Touch of the Poet. Please welcome our last performer for the evening, Ron Geren.
American cheese. Yeah. The individual slices. The ones that you can unwrap. And they're probably made out of some sort of petroleum product. You can wiggle them, and they won't break. And they're shiny. If you leave them out, they sweat. Love American cheese. I even like the kind that's in one whole pack and they're sort of layered so you can easily rip them off. Just like, I can eat it by itself and I can eat it with anything else. But my favorite dish is one I grew up with. It was the dish that my mother and I made together as a kid. Tuna casserole. It was my mom's thing. It was the comfort food that she gave me growing up. And whenever I go and visit her, we have a ritual, and we make it together. And it's my job to open the cans of tuna and the can of peas and strain them. And my mother's job is to pull out the same Teflon pan that she's had for 35 years. The kind that has the coating kind of scraped off from years of using a metal fork to stir things. So that's probably some sort of cancer-causing material in there, but I don't care because we're making tuna casserole with American cheese together. And she takes flour in a can that's supposed to be lighter. I think it's called Wondra. Sprinkles that in there, and then takes margarine, not butter, margarine, also a petroleum product, and mixes that together with her metal fork, scraping the pan. And on her stove, there's a beautiful set of wooden spoons that I got her for Christmas. It's like, Mom, why don't you use one of those wooden spoons that I got you? It's like, no, this is how I do it. And that's enough. That's enough of an explanation for me. I don't need to question that. That's just the way that she's been doing it forever. So she'll mix the margarine and the flour together and scrape it up on that pan. And then pull out some milk, 2%. Pour that in there and then mix that up with her metal fork. And then she'll pull out the one spice that she has in the cupboard, Lowry's seasoned salt. Pull that bad boy out. With flair, she'll put some Lowry's seasoned salt and then mix that up. Then it's my job. Then it's my time to shine in the light. I bring over the tuna and the peas and hand them to her, and she'll scrape that out and put that in there and then gently pour the strained peas in there and then mix up that mixture. Bring it to a slight boil, and then she'll bring out a bag of noodles. We don't know what kind of noodles they are. It just says noodles on the package. It's not penne or shells, or it just says noodles. Open that bag, pour those in there, mix that up with the metal fork, and I can still hear the scraping. And I'm imagining what those flakes of Teflon might be doing to my insides after all these years. But I don't care, because this is the thing that we do together. Bring that to a boil. Then, after that has settled and began to coagulate, which is one of my favorite words, coagulate. I could just say it for fun. Out comes the American cheese. We put a layer of that right over the top. Lower the heat and cover it. Oh, yeah. The tuna casserole is almost ready. Then, while that's coagulating, Mom pulls out her individually packaged servings of applesauce in little tiny plastic cartons. There's too much plastic and too much packaging for the 2 scoops of applesauce that are actually in that little cup. But it's just simpler. Rather than buying a jar and pulling out 1 spoon at a time, we need individually wrapped packages for each of us. Because they're special. My mother and I grew up together in a lot of ways. I have an older half-brother and half-sister from a different father. And they're much older than me, 20 years older than me. And by the time I was like 10 or 11, I was basically raised an only child, and it was just my mother and I. And I'm sure that there's some opportunity for me to talk to a therapist about what that relationship is like. Because I became, I think, the man in her life. And she was my best friend. And still is. I love my mother. And those times when we had an opportunity to cook together, even though it was, tuna casserole with American cheese and canned peas, those are the things that made me feel like I was just getting a hug. Just to stand there. We wouldn't even talk. It was like a choreographed little ballet of making this dish. She'd be on the stove side, I'd be opening the cans, and then we'd switch. Just this past Thanksgiving, I went up there for about a week and a half, Central Coast. And we made the tuna casserole together. It's like we always do. And even though we were best friends growing up, I know that my mother always saw me as that little boy that she gave birth to. Even though I'm a man now, she still treats me and talks to me and looks at me as if I'm that little boy. And there's something very comforting and very strange in that. So just a couple weeks ago, we went through our ritual. The cover is on the tuna casserole, and we've lowered the heat so that the cheese will melt perfectly. And we went to make our final maneuver, which is Mom will pick up the pan and rotate or swivel towards the counter, and then I can serve us. And when she went down to pick up the pan, her hands began to shake. And then she tried to hide it from me. As if this had been going on for a while. She just didn't want me to see. She's fiercely independent. Fiercely independent. After my father, she never got remarried. She never really had any other boyfriends. I think that she was just done with relationships, except for me. But her hands began to shake, and for the first time, I had to grab the pan. And she looked at me. And it was the first time that I had taken over that responsibility of actually taking the pan from one side of the kitchen to the other. At that moment, I knew that I wasn't the child in her eyes anymore. It had taken that moment of her not being able to get around that much anymore as a person who's now 84 years old. She'd come to terms in that moment with her own mortality in a lot of ways. She's kind of come to terms with the fact that somebody has to help her now. And she doesn't want to ask anybody. She just doesn't want to ask for help. She doesn't ask my brother and sister. She never asks me for anything. She always has a smile on her face. She rarely leaves the house anymore, but she always puts on a little bit of lips. She gets dressed because she wants to feel and look and act as if everything's fine, which is my favorite lie. That's my favorite lie. Everything's fine. And I kind of learned it from her, and I love her desperately, and I know that everything is fine with her, but when I saw her hand shaking, I know that it's the beginning of something that's not fine. And it will be, because I'm going to be able to be there to hold that pan for her. I'm going to help her. I get to be there for her. And when she looked at me that time, I knew I wasn't that little boy anymore, you know. I really believe that 2 weeks ago or a month ago or however long ago that was, when it was the Thanksgiving holiday, on that day, I became a man in my mother's eyes.